Polestar has quickly gone from having a one-car lineup to a showroom full of fresh models. The latest car to arrive on local shores is this Polestar 4, a new mid-sized SUV destined to take the fight to the Tesla Model Y. Does it have what it takes to upend that established rival? Well, we're not going to find that out today. However, there is one wacky feature on this Polestar 4 that I have to get into. So let's get straight into the video. Let's first talk about design, because the Polestar 4 does cut a distinctive figure on the roads. Up front, we do get a smooth front end, which is beset by a pair of mirrored headlights at each end. Now, this is unmistakably Polestar with its unfussy design, and it does move further away from its Volvo underpinnings. The car that we have at the moment, it is a dual motor car, and it does sit on a set of 22-inch wheels, which are optional. However, there are other wheel designs available. Without doubt, it is a very sleek side profile, and there are design points all over the place. Up front, you do get a set of cameras in the side here, and they are also integrated in the frameless side mirrors as well. You do also get a set of pop-out door handles that does aid aerodynamics. A little bit of body cladding. This is an SUV after all. And then at the end, you do get a charge port. Now, it does have the ability to charge up to 200 kilowatts on DC fast charging, but one of the most interesting parts of this car, in my opinion, is the sloping rear roofline. So the rear end is very out there in terms of its styling. In place of a rear window, this car has a body-colored panel which does lead down into a full-width light bar. In place of that rear window, it does have a camera feed which does feed through to the rear vision mirror. Now, in terms of design, some will like it, some will hate it, but be sure to let us know in the comments below your thoughts. Of course, when we are filming, the rain comes down, but we are going to persist. So at the back of the car, it does have a power-operated tailgate, which opens and paves way to a 526-litre storage capacity. Now, that does include underfloor storage as well, which is a really handy place to store your charging cables. And then one thing you might be interested in with this sort of coupe SUV style is the fact that this partition does remove entirely, and then that 60/40 folding rear bench does fold forward so you can slide in items as well. One thing I do want to point out on the Polestar 4 is the fact that its tailgate sort of lifts up, not sort of out and then up. So that is really handy when you are standing behind the car and you don't get hit in the face with a boot. The Polestar 4 launch is an important one for the brand. An electric SUV that hits the sweet spot between affordability and luxuriousness. It comes to Australia in a simple 2-strong range. Buyers do get the choice between a single motor rear-wheel drive variant or a dual motor all-wheel drive alternative. The former can travel up to 620 kilometers, while the latter gets a 590 kilometer driving range based on WLTP testing. Both models come equipped with a 100 kilowatt hour battery, of which 94 kilowatt hours is usable, which can accept charge rates of up to 200 kilowatts from a DC fast charger. It'll charge at up to 22 kilowatts on an AC connection depending on the variant. Price-wise, the Polestar 4 begins at $78,500 for the long-range single-motor variant, and the prices rise to $88,350 for the dual-motor all-wheel drive version. Polestar lopped between $3,000 and $4,700 off the price between the initial pricing announcement and this launch, meaning even the more expensive variant falls beneath the luxury car tax threshold for electric vehicles. In market, it competes against the Tesla Model Y and the Hyundai Ioniq 5, which are both sharp cars in their own right. You can find examples of each on Drive Marketplace. There are a number of option packs available, but the car we're honing in on today is the dual motor variant. As standard, the Polestar 4 comes equipped with a 15.4-inch landscape-oriented touchscreen with Google built-in and Apple CarPlay smartphone mirroring. It also gets a 10.2-inch digital cluster, 8 speakers, dual-zone climate control, and a powered boot. The Polestar 4 dual-motor variant produces a combined 400 kilowatts and 686 newton-meters from its front and rear electric motors. Enough oomph for the car to run from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in 3.8 seconds, according to the brand. Without doubt, this is the fastest Polestar produced to date. Inside, Polestar's signature minimalist design is on full display, and I'm really here for it. There are very few sort of contrasting inlays and different design points. It just presents nice and cleanly, and it is just nicely presented overall. This car that we're in at the moment, it does specify the performance pack and it does have Nappa leather. And with the performance pack, you do get yellow seat belts, and this is a little bit different to the car that we'll be driving later. However, every Polestar 4 is nicely specified. So no matter what car you do choose, you are getting a very, very presentable interior. Now, in terms of materials and fit and finish, everything is done to a very nice standard. The steering wheel leather is very nice in your hand. Everything is covered in nice materials, and there are soft sort of textiles that you do get to touch. It does feel very nice. And overall, I'm finding that I'm in a good driving position as well. I've got good support around me, and I've been able to organize a nice driving position. In terms of storage, you do get a pair of cup holders on the center console here, a wireless smartphone charger. You do get a volume control down on the center tunnel as well. And then inside here, you do have a little bit of a central compartment that does house a pair of USB-C ports. But it does get smarter once you go underneath this sort of flyover central console design, because there is a little space for small bags and a little tray as well. So in the design and interior storage space, Polestar has been really considered and does have a really nice array of options to store your odds and ends. The infotainment is one of the Polestar's most interesting attributes. I love the script and the iconography Polestar uses. The text looks great and is very readable on the big screen, while its functionality is easy to come to terms with. Moving from a portrait display in its other models to a landscape orientation in this car is a big positive. It feels like you can see more information on the screen simultaneously in this format. Keep in mind that Polestar can push software updates to the car wirelessly too, to fix glitches and slow performance. There are a lot of new electric vehicles in the market. Let us know in the comments below which models you're keeping an eye on. And please consider sharing this video if you've learned something interesting about the Polestar 4. All right, here we are in the second row. Now, Polestar does make a point of calling out this space because it does have that sloping roofline, and they are keen to point out the fact that it does aid interior space. And when I am sat back here, I am finding that it is a comfortable space. I've got good knee room around me. I've actually got decent headroom as well. I'm not really encumbered by the roofline here, but my knees are sort of awkwardly up in the air, and it is a high sort of loading floor as well. So you do have to step on it and have your knees sort of awkwardly flaying in the distance. And there is no way to stow your feet. So there's no space underneath this seat in front of me. That is quite annoying for a car of this size. So it could have a little bit more storage in that stakes. Now, Polestar does also point out the fact that this does have a reclining rear seat. So if you do pull this down like so, there are controls that you can put the rear seat back, and then I'm sort of out of camera there, but it does go back up again. And it does have a little bit more space when you do recline that second row. Now, in terms of amenities, you do have air vents, a control panel to change that as well, map pockets, and then you do have little sort of stowages in the door panels as well, but you don't have grab handles above you, so you can't hold on. So that is a little bit of a miss out there. But I'm finding this is a nice interior space, if a little bit cramped on footroom. Okay, here we are pulling away in the Polestar 4, and initially I wanted to say the lack of a rear view window, I wanted to maybe complain about it or maybe suggest that it's a little bit jarring, but in my initial impressions, I actually don't feel like I'm missing that rear window all too much. I'm getting a good vision of the road behind me. It's offering up a pretty decent display, and the refresh rate is quite impressive. But then again, when you do come to maneuvering the car and when you are parking it, you don't get that critical depth perception. So kind of is handy when you are getting close to certain objects, whether it be a wall, whether it be another car. You don't have that sort of visual feedback that you do get with a mirror, and you don't have that reference point. So it is a little bit interesting when you are in car parks and that sort of thing, but overall, I find that the lack of a rear window, it's actually not as bad as I thought. Now, in terms of design, it's kind of up to the buyer, really. Like, it's up to everyone's sort of preference whether they like that sort of design aspect or not. In my opinion, I've come to like it. I thought I wouldn't enjoy it quite as much, but spending time in the car, I really do quite like that sort of really sort of tapered off look, and it is very seamless in its styling. So as stated, the car that I am driving at the moment is a dual motor long range car. So Both the single motor and the dual motor, they are long range variants in Australia, both powered by a 100 kilowatt hour battery, but the difference is this car has twice as much power as you do get in the single motor car. Now there are a couple settings that you can dive into the infotainment system and then sort of tweak the drive settings. So at the moment I've got it in sort of a normal sort of everyday mundane setting, but it does have a performance setting as well. So when you do floor the car, it will offer up that full 400 kilowatts of power instantaneously, and it is absolutely rapid. The tricky thing that I find is you do have to dive into the infotainment and then prod around a little bit, and it's not always precise to your finger inputs. So there are a few things to dive through here. I'm turning on the performance power delivery here, and it does have 3 settings of steering feel, and in my preference I do like the firm setting. And then in this car that we have at the moment, it does have an adaptive damping system. So you do have standard, I've got it in nimble at the moment, which is a sort of midway between firm and standard, and that is giving you a little bit more of a dynamic feel when you are driving a car. It's not rolling quite as much as I experienced in the single motor car earlier in the day, but then again, this is a firm car. The dual motor doesn't have the same sort of compliance when you are going over sort of road imperfections, when you are going over speed humps. It doesn't sort of absorb those sort of tricky imperfections as well as a single motor car. One thing that I find a little bit tricky these days in modern cars is that sometimes they do come with tricky sort of driver monitoring systems and driver attention monitoring systems that can sort of monitor what your sort of road user level awareness is, and I kind of find it quite annoying. But the system that the Polestar 4 has, it doesn't really sort of get in the way too much. At the moment it is sort of telling me that I'm talking to a camera, I'm looking away from the road ahead, and there is a camera monitoring me here in front of me, but it's just a very sort of subtle sort of noise that you don't really sort of get upset about. So it is nice in that regard, and you can dive into the infotainment and sort of turn that thing off, but it does turn itself back on every time you start the car. We've been driving the Polestar 4 around a ton of country roads, and they have been tight and twisty, and they haven't been the best quality around rural South Australia today. And I found that the ride compliance and road comfort is pretty decent on the single motor car. This dual motor one that I'm in at the moment, it doesn't have the sort of best compliance, but if you do really want that sort of refinement, definitely go for the single motor car. But one thing both of them do quite well is the fact that they are very quiet inside the cabin. I'm not getting a whole lot of noise into the cabin, and the refinement overall is really impressive. There's not that much vibration, and it is really cocooned inside the interior. So well done to Polestar in that regard. At the moment, I do have the car in performance mode, so when I do lean on that throttle, it will output the full 400 kilowatts and 686 newton meters of torque. And when I put my foot down now, it is absolutely rapid. So no doubt this is the fastest Polestar that they have come out with, and it feels absolutely incredible in terms of forward acceleration, and it is very dynamic overall. All right, we've got a bit of a twisty road now, so it's time to get a little bit more dynamic. And this car really holds its own in the performance modes. When you do have the car's dampers in its firmest setting, this is staying flat and holding the road really quite nicely. And the punch out of corners is absolutely rapid. Now, this is not a small car. Its on-road footprint, it is quite large, and given we are driving tight roads at the moment, you do sort of have to be wary of where you are placing the car. But overall, when you are driving this around town, you do have a lot of comfort inside this cabin, and I've got a nice driving position. It's only when you are in the second row and you are trying to put your feet underneath these seats that I'm sat in now, the under sort of seat footroom isn't that great. However, I've been able to organize myself a nice driving position, and I've got a really good view of the road ahead of me. One thing a few of my colleagues impressed to me before I went on this Polestar 4 launch drive was the fact that the cars that they drove overseas, they weren't put together that well, and they had the wrong components. Now, the cars that we do get in Polestar 4's Australian lineup, these are much better sorted and they do have the right specifications. So this does feel quite nice to drive, and it is really absorbing bumps and holding its composure on the roads really quite nicely. I have to say, I'm not really gelling with everything being controlled by the infotainment screen. Your mirror adjustments are inside the infotainment screen. That would be so much easier if it was on my armrest here. And then things like the steering wheel adjustment, I don't want to have to dive into the infotainment and make suggestions of where I want certain positions of my steering wheel. That kind of thing, it might be easier when you own the car and you are jumping back in it and it does remember your preset settings, but it does sort of seem like a needlessly confusing way of confounding something that should be simple. I do really like the driver instrument display inside the cluster here. It does offer a decent amount of displays and gauges that you can sort of cycle between. At the moment, I've got it in the Google built-in Maps navigation display, so you can see my little route ahead of me. But you can also cycle between a straight up speed display and a sort of driver ADAS monitoring sort of overview as well. One final point I want to make about the infotainment-based controls is even the air vents, you do have to control them using the touchscreen, and it is not a simple process because you're sort of just aimlessly pointing where vaguely you want the air to go. It's not that exact of a science, and I would much prefer just having a physical sort of connector there so that you can easily sort of just position the air with. While we are talking about touchscreen-based controls, I don't exactly love the adjustments that you can make on the steering wheel because there are no sort of direct buttons that you can press. It's just a vague pad that sort of gestures up and down, and it isn't the most easiest thing to use for whether you're adjusting volume or you're making settings changes in the driver's display there. It could be a little bit easier if it just had a simple button. All Polestar 4s, no matter the specification, they all do come with Brembo brakes. So no matter what car you go for, you are getting Brembo brakes, and they really do pull up the car in short order. So you are getting very good braking ability from the car there. And then there are things like a one pedal drive mode, and it does have varying levels of braking recuperation as well. So my final verdict on the Polestar 4 and its wacky rear window, or lack thereof. Well, I reckon this is a very nice car to drive. This dual motor car probably isn't the specification I would go for, but overall, I've really enjoyed my time in this car, and I do really look forward to spending a bit more wheel time in it in future weeks and months. Well, how have I found the Polestar 4? Coming into this experience, I expected that the lack of a rear window, it would grate on me, but overall, driving the car hasn't really impacted on me nearly as much as I thought it would. There are a little bit of learnings that you have to sort of take on board to drive around it, but overall, it does work quite well having that rear view camera. Dynamically, this is a really smart car to drive. I've enjoyed the single motor variant in particular, but however, this dual motor car, it is really impressive to drive and is extremely fast. Now, in terms of design, the exterior and interior are equally really impressive. Very sumptuous comfort inside the cabin, and this thing does strike a very impressive figure on the road. It is a little bit more expensive than its Tesla Model Y rival. However, you are getting a really nice car overall, and I'm really excited to be putting this car up against a Tesla in due course. Now, if you've liked this video or you've learned something interesting about the Polestar 4, please give us a like on YouTube to show your support. And if you want to read more about the full review of this Polestar 4, be sure to head over to Drive.com.au.